The perfect facade. The penthouse overlooked Chicago's glittering skyline, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city like a painting. Madeline stood before one of those windows now, paintbrush suspended midair, watching the sun melt into Lake Michigan. She'd been standing there for 20 minutes, or was it an hour? Time had become a blur lately. Behind her, the apartment was immaculate. Every surface gleamed. Every pillow was perfectly placed. The woman who lived here was successful, beautiful, and envied by everyone who knew her. She was also, Madeline realized, with a quiet ache in her chest, completely invisible. "Madeline, are you still here?" Ethan's voice cut through the silence as he entered the penthouse, loosening his tie. He didn't look at her. His eyes were already on his phone, scrolling through emails that apparently held more interest than the woman waiting for him. "I've been waiting," she said softly, setting down her brush. "I wanted to talk about— Listen, I have a conference call in 5 minutes. The Singapore merger is falling apart." He was already walking toward his office, shedding his jacket as he moved. "Did you order dinner? I'll eat later." Madeline's words caught in her throat. Again. Always again. She returned to the window, staring at her reflection in the glass. The woman looking back at her was a ghost wearing Chanel. Her own artwork lay scattered across the studio in the spare bedroom. Vibrant, raw, desperate pieces that she'd shown to no one. Paintings that screamed the things she could never say out loud. 5 years of marriage. 5 years of shrinking herself smaller and smaller to fit into Ethan's world. She'd given up her gallery showings, her artist collective, her dreams, all to be the perfect wife to a man who barely registered her existence. That night, after Ethan fell asleep in their bedroom, Madeline stood in her studio one last time. She looked at the paintings surrounding her, each one a silent scream, a diary entry in color and texture. Slowly, methodically, she began to pack. Not clothes, not jewelry, only her art. By 3 a.m., she'd written no note, left no explanation. She simply closed the door behind her and disappeared into the night, leaving Ethan to wake up alone, wondering where the woman he'd forgotten to love had gone. She was finally going to find herself, even if it meant losing everything else.
The obsession. 6 months had passed, and Ethan had become a man consumed by ghosts. The penthouse that once felt like a sanctuary now suffocated him. Her paintings were gone, her brushes, her perfume had faded from the pillows. Even her presence seemed to have been erased from the very walls. The first week after her disappearance, Ethan had convinced himself it was a mistake, that Madeline had simply gone to visit her mother in Vermont without telling him. But days turned into weeks, and the reality of her absence became undeniable. She wasn't answering her phone. Her bank accounts had been frozen. It was as though she'd vanished into thin air, leaving behind nothing but questions and an overwhelming silence. He hired investigators. 3 of them. They combed through her phone records, contacted her friends, spoke to her family. Nothing. No forwarding address, no credit card transactions, no paper trail. It was as if Madeline had orchestrated her own disappearance with surgical precision. Ethan's guilt became his constant companion. During restless nights in the empty penthouse, he replayed every conversation, every dismissal, every moment he'd failed to truly see her. He remembered the way her eyes would light up when she talked about her art, only to dim when she realized he wasn't really listening. He thought of all the times she'd tried to reach for him and how he'd pulled away, buried in his work, convinced that providing for her was enough. He stopped going to the office. His colleagues grew concerned. His business partners grew frustrated. But none of it mattered. The Singapore merger could crumble. The company could burn. Nothing compared to the weight of losing Madeline. 2 months into his search, Ethan discovered something that sent chills through his entire body. A gallery owner in New York had received an anonymous submission, a collection of paintings so raw, so powerful that it had moved her to tears. The artist's name was obscured, but the signature on each piece was unmistakable. A small, delicate M with a brushstroke through it. Madeline's mark. His heart raced. She was alive. She was creating. But she was doing it far away from him, far away from their life together, and with no intention of letting him know. Ethan's desperation grew into an all-consuming obsession. He spent every waking hour tracking exhibitions, searching databases, following digital breadcrumbs. He became a man hunting for the wife who'd abandoned him, driven not just by love, but the desperate need to understand why she'd chosen erasure over everything they'd built together. He didn't realize that Madeline had already moved beyond erasure. She was building something entirely new, something extraordinary, and Ethan was still looking backward into the ruins of what used to be. Part 3. The Revelation. The coffee shop was unremarkable. The kind of place Ethan had walked past 1,000 times without noticing. But on this gray Tuesday morning in October, it would change everything. He was waiting for his order when he spotted it. A magazine rack near the window display. Vogue. He almost walked past it, but something made him pause. Perhaps it was a subconscious recognition, a sixth sense that had been sharpened by months of obsessive searching. He reached for the magazine, and his world stopped. There she was. The woman on the cover was ethereal, almost unrecognizable in her perfection. She wore a cascading gown of midnight blue, her hair swept to one side, her eyes holding a depth and confidence that Ethan had never seen before. But it was unmistakably her. It was Madeline. With trembling hands, Ethan opened the magazine. The headline burned itself into his mind. The reclusive artist who found her voice. How Madeline Ashford became the most sought-after contemporary artist of the year. Madeline Ashford, not Madeline Reed. She'd even changed her name. The article was a masterpiece of revelation. It told of a woman who had left her previous life to pursue her true passion. It spoke of groundbreaking exhibitions across Europe, private showings in London, Paris, and Milan. It described how her work, raw, haunting paintings about forgotten women and silenced voices, had captivated the art world and critics alike. The article featured interviews with gallery owners who praised her genius, collectors who spoke of being moved to tears by her pieces, and fellow artists who hailed her as a revolutionary voice. But the most devastating part came near the end, in a section titled Finding Freedom. Madeline had given a brief interview, and her words struck Ethan like a physical blow. "I had to leave to become myself. I couldn't create authentically while living inauthentically. Every stroke of the brush is a confession, and I had been living a lie. My art is my truth, and I couldn't share my truth with someone who didn't see me." The photograph accompanying the interview showed her in a gallery surrounded by her paintings. She was smiling, genuinely smiling, in a way Ethan couldn't remember ever seeing. Her hand rested gently on the arm of a tall, elegant man with kind eyes, and the caption simply read, "Madeline with fellow artist and partner, James Mitchell." A partner. She'd found someone else, someone who saw her, someone who supported her dreams instead of suffocating them. Ethan's coffee grew cold as he sat frozen in the cafe, the magazine trembling in his hands. The woman he'd neglected had become a phenomenon. The woman he'd failed to see had become unforgettable. And the woman he'd lost to his own indifference was now living the life she always deserved, just not with him. The irony was almost intolerable. In searching for Madeline, Ethan had finally found proof that she never needed to be found. She needed to be free.
The reunion. The message came through an email address Ethan didn't recognize. The sender identified herself as Victoria Chen, Madeline's manager. The subject line was simple: "Madeline will see you." It took Ethan's breath away. After months of searching, of obsessing, of feeling utterly powerless, Madeline had agreed to meet him. But there was a condition attached, stated in Victoria's carefully worded email.
She is willing to meet with you once. Understand that this is not a reconciliation. Madeline has moved forward with her life and she does not anticipate returning to her previous circumstances. This meeting is for closure only. The word stung, but Ethan didn't care. He would take whatever he could get. They agreed to meet at a private gallery in Soho, after hours. Ethan arrived early, his palms sweating, his heart thundering in his chest. The gallery was stunning. White walls, polished concrete floors, and displayed throughout were paintings that took his breath away. Some of them, he realized with a start, were from the studio in their penthouse, the ones he'd never truly appreciated. And then she walked in. Madeline looked nothing like the woman who'd left him 6 months ago. She was radiant, confident, moving through the gallery with the grace of someone who finally belonged to herself. She wore a simple black dress, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, and when she saw him, her expression remained calm and composed, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of something complicated. "Hello, Ethan," she said, her voice steady. He wanted to rush to her, to pull her into his arms, to beg her forgiveness. Instead, he stood frozen, trying to reconcile the woman before him with the memory of the one he'd lost. "Madeline," he breathed, I don't even know where to start." "Then don't," she said gently, walking toward one of her paintings, a massive canvas depicting a woman breaking free from chains made of silk and roses. "I think my work has already said everything that needs to be said." They stood in silence, surrounded by the visual manifestation of her pain, her growth, her transformation. "I've been looking for you," Ethan finally said. "For months. I couldn't eat, couldn't work, couldn't think about anything but finding you." Madeline turned to face him, and he saw compassion in her eyes, but also a resolute distance. "I know," she said, "but I need you to understand something, Ethan. I didn't leave to be found. I left to find myself." "I know that now, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for not seeing you, for taking you for granted, for—" "I believe you," she interrupted, and somehow that was worse than anger would have been. "But believing you changes nothing. I can't go back to being invisible, and I don't think I ever could have, even if you'd realized what you were losing." Ethan felt the ground shift beneath him. "Are you saying there's no chance? That we're just over?" Madeline's expression softened, and for a moment, he saw a glimmer of the woman he'd fallen in love with all those years ago. "We were over the moment I realized you couldn't see me. This," she gestured around the gallery, at her life, at everything she'd become, "is my life now, and I'm happy, truly happy for the first time in years." "With him," Ethan said bitterly. "With James." "With myself," Madeline corrected. "James is wonderful, and yes, I love him. But that's not the point. The point is that I love my life. I love my work. I love the woman I've become. And that woman doesn't need rescuing, Ethan. She never did." He wanted to argue, to convince her, to somehow turn back time. But as he looked at her, really looked at her, he realized something devastating. The woman he'd fallen in love with all those years ago was still inside her, but she'd grown. She'd evolved. She'd become everything she was meant to be, and that woman had no room for the man who'd almost destroyed her dreams. "I would change everything," he said quietly, "if I could go back." "But you can't," she said not unkindly, "and I'm grateful for that, because if you hadn't been the way you were, I never would have had the strength to leave. I needed to lose you to find myself." As she walked toward the door, Ethan realized the cruelest truth of all. His love for Madeline had never truly been about her. It had been about possession, about control, about the fantasy of who she should be. Her love for herself, her passion for her art, her journey toward freedom, that was real. That was true. And it had nothing to do with him. Part 5. The Letting Go. Weeks passed after their meeting, and Ethan existed in a strange limbo between grief and revelation.
He'd moved out of the penthouse, unable to bear the weight of the memories that haunted every room. He rented a modest apartment on the north side of the city, far from Lakeshore Drive and the ghosts of their life together. He tried to return to work, to rebuild the company that had fallen apart during his months of obsession, but something had shifted inside him. The deals that once thrilled him felt hollow. The accolades and success he'd chased so relentlessly now seemed like the compensations of a man running from something. Or perhaps, he realized with painful clarity, a man running from himself. One evening he received a package. Inside was a book, a coffee table volume showcasing Madeline's most recent collection. The title was Invisible No More, A Portrait of Awakening. He opened it with trembling hands and saw page after page of her extraordinary work. But it was the final section that stopped his heart. A series of paintings labeled, "For the Man I Had to Leave Behind." The paintings were brutal in their honesty. They depicted a woman trapped in amber, beautiful but lifeless. A man made of stone reaching out, but incapable of feeling. A love that suffocated instead of nurturing. A marriage that was a masterpiece of performance, nothing more. But the final painting was different. It showed a woman, freed from her chains, walking into a landscape of endless possibility. The man was fading in the background, becoming transparent, dissolving into watercolor. And across the painting was Madeline's handwriting, words that would haunt him forever. "I loved you once, but I learned that sometimes love means letting go." Ethan closed the book and wept, not for what he'd lost, but for what he'd never truly had. He'd been married to Madeline's potential, not her reality. He loved the idea of her, not the truth of who she was. Her love for herself, her passion for her art, her journey toward freedom, that was real. That was true. And it had nothing to do with him. As months turned into a year, Ethan began his own transformation. He stepped back from his company, hiring a CEO who actually cared about people, not just profit. He started therapy, beginning the long and painful process of understanding why he'd needed to possess Madeline rather than cherish her. He took up running, photography, things that existed outside of ambition and control. One afternoon, while walking through a gallery in Chicago, he saw an announcement. Madeline was having a major retrospective exhibition in the city. Her first show back in Chicago since her disappearance. He knew he shouldn't go, but he felt drawn to it like a moth to flame. The gallery was packed on opening night, and Ethan stood in the back, watching from a distance, as Madeline mingled with collectors and admirers. She was radiant, glowing with the light of someone who had finally become herself. James stood beside her, his hand never leaving the small of her back, protective and loving in a way that made Ethan's heart ache with recognition of everything he'd failed to be. But then something unexpected happened. Madeline's eyes found his across the crowded gallery, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. He saw recognition there, and something else. Perhaps forgiveness. She smiled at him, a genuine smile tinged with melancholy, and gave a subtle nod. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't a second chance. It was something more profound. It was acknowledgement. It was the recognition that they had both been lost, but only one of them had found the courage to search for herself. I understood then what he'd been too blind to see before. That true love isn't about keeping someone. It's about setting them free. It's about wanting their happiness more than your own comfort. It's about recognizing that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the absence of yourself. He left the gallery that night with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He didn't need Madeline to come back. He didn't need her to choose him. He needed to become someone worthy of letting her go. In the months that followed, Ethan rebuilt his life, not around the ghost of Madeline, but around himself. He became kinder, more present, more authentic. He learned to listen, to truly see people, to value their dreams over his own needs.
And though he and Madeline never spoke again, her art became his teacher. Every time he felt the old patterns of possession and control creeping in, he would remember one of her paintings. He would remember the woman breaking free from chains made of silk and roses. He would remember her words, "I loved you once, but I learned that sometimes love means letting go." Years later, Madeline's exhibitions would tour the world, and Ethan would